Mr. Birdie and members of the board, we have several items for board discussion this evening. Our first two items are in regard to an MOU and some board policies. Mr. Martin will be covering those first two items, so at this time, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Birding, members of the board, the first item I'd like to talk to you about is a memorandum of understanding between the board and the Fairfield Classroom Teacher Association. We have a current MOU that's very similar this year that we agreed upon. Basically, what the MOU is saying is that we did this because of the pandemic. If at any time during the school year we have to close and people who have supplemental contracts are unable to complete their supplemental contract, that we don't automatically pay them for that. We will pay them for any time that they work, but if they're unable to fulfill their contracts, then they don't get paid for those contracts. That was in place this year, and it worked really well. There was one stipulation in there where it was based on the pay that they received that the teachers really didn't care a lot about. They were used to getting their year-long contracts broken up over each pay during the year. And this year, because we were so unsure about whether or not we would be here, we agreed to pay year-long contracts, supplemental contracts, twice a year. After the first half of the year's work was done, we paid them in January. And after the second half of the year's work was done, we paid them in June. So we wanted to be sensitive to their input to that once again. So this new MOU has the same stipulation. The district is still protected, not having to pay for work that wasn't completed, but we've agreed to pay them from the time that the board approves their contract and they get their contract signed and turned in. Whatever their pay is will be divided over the remaining pay periods of the year. If for some reason someone is overpaid, there's also a process in this MOU that tells how we would get the money back from them. That usually does not happen, but so everyone is in agreement with this. I've worked with Nancy Lane and John Clemens. The FCTA has already given their initial approval for this, and I just wanted to present it to you this evening. Any questions about this MOU? It would be for 2 years.
Okay.
Until our contract is renewed, and then when we bargain our next contract, we would try to get this language into the actual contract itself.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then I have 4 board policies that I'd like to just talk with you about a little bit about. The first one is policy EB, and the title of that is Safety Program. There's nothing major to this. We haven't updated this since 2001. The OSBA language has changed a little bit, the way that they word things. And a lot of their policies I've noticed recently have been going from being very specific to more general, so that our hands aren't tied in some of these policies. So it's just updating the language and making sure that we're compliant with all state requirements, which this safety program policy does provide for us. In all the policies I'll be talking about this evening, OSBA will automatically update the legal and cross-references for us. Any questions about policy EB?
Hearing none, okay.
All right. The next policy is policy EBCD, and it's emergency closing. This policy is being updated to reflect OSBA's most current language. Our policy still had the language in it that talked about calamity days. Since back in 2013, when the state went from days to hours and what we're required to have sessions in school, at that time they took out calamity language, but this has not been updated. The other thing that we're changing in here is we have chosen some language that districts don't have to do, but we can do, and that is if we have a lot of days that we need to make up, we're allowed to make up 3 of those via online instruction. Now that we're used to providing online instruction, that would keep the school calendar from extending into the summer days by 3 days if we ever have to make up days. That's a major change. We will bring more information to you later about how we're going to put that plan into place, but this does allow us to handle emergency closings like that. Any questions about EBCD?
Hearing none.
Okay. The next policy is policy EFH, and this is a required policy, but we do not currently have a policy that's board approved, so we are just accepting the OSBA language here. We have had food allergies covered under another policy, policy JHCE, which talks about managing students with severe allergies, and we have a regulation about that as well. But this policy recognizes food allergies as a safety concern for our district. It talks about how those concerns will be addressed, and it talks about the development of a food allergy plan, which will involve stakeholders around the district. I know Mr. Crapo is already aware that we need that plan in place. Like I said, we have other food allergy plans, but a comprehensive district-wide plan, including training, is not in place. So we will try to have that in place for the next school year. Any questions about EFH?
Hearing none.
Okay. The next policy, policy IGBEA, it's on reading skills and assessments, reading skills assessments and interventions. It's the third grade reading guarantee. And although we have an adopted policy, that's why this policy looks a little different than the other ones. This is our policy that was adopted. For some reason, OSBA, when they posted our policies, they never posted this, but it is an approved policy by the board. I'm going to resubmit that to them, but before I do, there were a couple changes we need to make. One of them is that when you do a reading assessment for students in kindergarten, grades 1 through 3 have to have their assessments done by September 30th, but the state gives us until November 1st to complete the kindergarten tests, so we're changing that. The other changes, there's two. One is that we can now administer these tests by using live two-way video and audio connections, which has not been in place in the past, so that can still be done. And then the third thing that we're changing is we've taken away the language high-performing teachers. If a person is retained in third grade, they're supposed to be placed with a teacher that has specific criteria now. The criteria is based on their experience, the years teaching, the training that they have, and how they perform on their own evaluations. And so this just generally talks about they have to meet set criteria. Those are the changes for IGBEA. Any questions about this policy?
No. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
You're very welcome. We'll vote on those at the next meeting.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, Mr. Smith.
Yes, our last item for discussion is in regard to some job descriptions. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Myers.
Good evening. I hope you enjoyed all this reading material I gave you this week. So what I'm presenting to you tonight, there's two different areas. There's one for extracurriculars, which Mr. Martin presented to you back in May, all of the positions that the Extracurricular Review Committee approved to move forward with. I think he gave you an explanation of the reason behind it and what that entailed. So I have a group of job descriptions for those positions. And then the second group is job descriptions within the district that needed some updates. So the extracurricular positions, those were reviewed by Mr. Martin, Mr. Clemens, and then also approved by the FCTA as well. And then all the other job descriptions were reviewed by the leadership team and Mr. Clemens also. So first, African Student Union Advisor. This was a change in the name and the schedule. So it went from sponsor to advisor and changed to a Schedule 2. Just included some updated language to make it more updated with what we're using today when it comes to background checks and licensure. I'll just go through all of these, and then you all can ask questions at the end. Okay. Athletic Facilities Coordinator, this was the athletic director for the freshman building. Things have changed and evolved through the years with OHSAA. So the athletic director, Mr. Blankenship, has reviewed this and to fit the needs of our district. There's not many freshman teams either, so he wanted to see how to best utilize this position. I'm sure Mr. Martin explained this last month. So this job description has a name change, and it's changed from the freshman to the district in the schedule. And then a lot of the language removed was, that was specific to being responsible for eligibility, for the students, and what most athletic directors are responsible for specifically, and this has more of a focus on facilities and being at the senior high and freshman games and being responsible for that and the contact for that. Assistant Transportation Director, this was very outdated, and I will tell you this and the Transportation Director, there was no approval date for the board on those job descriptions, so I had to completely revamp it. We know they were approved back in 2009, so it has been a while since these have been updated. So cleared up a lot of language that is no longer the situation with the positions. I worked with those individuals to see what might be missing and what they actually do today, and added more leadership, administrative responsibilities to the qualifications. Bullying and Harassment Specialist, Title IX Coordinator. This position has always been responsible for the mental health aspect and duties in the district, and that was not in the job description. That was updated last year. So you'll see on the second page, at the end of essential functions, all the mental health pieces with the committee, the mental health series, and how they work with individuals in the community and the district has been included in that. Coordinator of Elementary Curriculum and Instruction. You already saw this a couple of months ago, and we already need to update it. So we need to clear up a couple of items, which is on the third page. They were combined and didn't make any sense, so we separated those out. So number 16, we removed the second half of that line and then cleared up that language of the responsibility for grants and federal programs to that. Director of Human Resources. I have added a duty to this position. Back in March, the Director of Business Operations, we removed workers' compensation from that job, that position, and we've added it over to the Human Resources side, so that has been the change to this job description. English as a second language teacher has now, in the past couple of years, this has changed. In the past, it's been ELL, then ESL, now it's EL, English learner. So this is just updating to the current language to EL, so now it should be titled English learner teacher. That language has been changed throughout this document. And then following that is the English as a second language tutor. So this job description, not only are we changing from ESL to EL, the English English learner tutor, this mirrored a teacher's job description, which is not appropriate. This is not what the position does. So we removed a lot of that teaching language, instruction, planning, and that responsibility. They're still helping and assisting in what that teacher needs in the classroom. Intramural Soccer, this is the elementary intramural for soccer at Central Elementary. So this is a new position that has been added. Standard language we use for most extracurricular positions, and then a few specific to soccer. Fairfield for Change Advisor, this is also a new position. Again, same standard language we use in extracurriculars, and then specific to the position. House Tribal Coordinator is a new position at the high school. Again, that is all standard language. Intramurals Elementary. This was updated because of the soccer intramural that we just created. We noticed some language in there wasn't correct, so we went back to this one that has already been in place and changed some of that language to update. And then on the back, we had to add some of the standard language that I spoke to about the extracurriculars in all job descriptions. Peer tutoring coordinator at the high school, this has been a schedule change, and then again, cleaned up some of the language in there. Pop's orchestra co-director. This was Pop's director originally. Now they've asked to add a position and create a co-director position. So the title has changed, and then we just cleaned up the language while we were in there as well. Power of the Pen sponsors, this is a new position. It is 2 positions at the middle school, and this is, again, all standard language for extracurriculars, and then some specific to the position. Coordinator of, secondary curriculum and instruction. So this is kind of, we did the elementary curriculum and instruction coordinator position a couple months ago, so now we're finally getting to the secondary. So it's a title change, coordinator of secondary curriculum and instruction, and cleaned up some language, and then it previously said grades 6 through 12. That's not how we're aligned anymore. We are now 7 to 12, so put that all throughout, and just cleaned up some language for items that are no longer current, any programs that are current, and what the position's actually doing. School and Community Relations Director, another one that is very outdated. So you can see there's a lot of additions to this in the qualifications. So most of that is pulled from the standard leadership language that for administrators and their job descriptions, and then kind of adding more specific job duties of what that position is currently doing. The track head coach for 7th and 8th grade, this is a schedule change. They, as Roger probably mentioned last time, they were on the same schedule as all the track coaches for middle school, so it makes sense that they are moving up another schedule. So we just went in there and cleaned up language while we made that change. Transportation director, as I mentioned, this was one that was very outdated, and we aren't really sure when it was board approved, but we know it was back in 2009. So added a lot of language, cleaned it up, took out what is no longer happening, and so added those leadership pieces. And lastly, volleyball varsity head coach. This has been a schedule change, and at the same time went in there and cleaned up the language and the qualifications. So those are all of my items for your job descriptions. Do you have any questions?
Questions? Mr.
Yes.
Clark?
First of all, great job. I know that was very tedious. It's been 2009 for most of this, and I see a lot of line crossing, and I know your pen was probably wore out. So thank you very much for updating to current status and for doing a great job. I had a question on the English as a second language. That's kind of been the term that's always been there. So moving it to English learner, there's probably not a direct answer, but is that, I know it's kids, but will the parents that maybe don't speak English either understand that when they sign their children up, or have you thought about, or have we thought about how that will communicate to the parents?
I am not sure about that. I don't know how you might address that with how they handle it in your department or at the building level. I don't know if anybody else can speak to it. I simply do the job description, and this is how the state, this is how the state refers to this population now.
Okay.
Mr. Clark, if I may, are you asking about when they come in to register their children? Is that what you're asking about, or when they register or come into the office?
Yes, will they understand the English as a second language is now the English learner? Does it appear to be two different things? Maybe we get rid of the second language part, and I don't know.
So our folks at the registration center do a great job, and also with translators when that's necessary as well,
Okay.
to help them get through that process. So probably on some of the forms and whatnot, this may be changed, but it won't directly impact our practices and our procedures when families come in to register, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I didn't think it would affect the teaching part, just the communication between the parents, the community, because a lot of those English as a second language families, they know it as English as a second language. So.
And I think even in my 5 years being here, this is the third time it's changed.
Okay.
So it's gone, like I said, ELL to ESL so everybody still refers to the old acronyms still. So it's just, and this has been going on for 2 years now, I think, but we're finally catching up to
I know when I was on the
changing.
business advisory, they said ELL, and always in my mind, from my involvement, it's always been ESL, and I had to, what's ELL? All right, well,
Now
thank
it's
you.
EL.
And now it's EL.
Yeah,
Just
right.
Shorten it up.
Right.
Thank you, and a great job again. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a
Yes.
question about, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I had a question about the School and Community Relations Director, and then the qualifications and general description. It doesn't mention anything specific to crisis management, and I would think that would fall under their heading in dealing with those situations. Is that beyond just a job function, is that a job skill that that person should have and that we should require?
You're giving me food for thought. This is, because it can go two different ways. It's a function of a team, I think. So it wouldn't be something that would be a qualification, but as a function, what specifically does this person have in there? So I would have to look into what those specific areas are, because it is a team when something happens, a crisis happens. So that team, those specific functions aren't in their job description. So that would be another item we'd have to look at for the other job descriptions. Do we have specific pieces, or is it, so that is something I will look into to see how that works.
Mr. Shorter?
Okay, thank you. My questions are also pertaining to the English learner job description. There are a number of things that have been removed from the description, and maybe Mr. Martin can speak to this as well. But under essential functions, line 6, the line, develop a coherent instructional plan which guides the learning process towards the achievement of course study goals and establishes clear objectives for all lessons, units, projects, and other instructional activities. Clearly communicates such goals and objectives to students and parents. That's been removed, and I'm not sure that I see where that's incorporated into any other verbiage, in the actual job description. Also, line item 9, plan a program of study that meets the individual needs, interests, and abilities of the students, and leads to the mastery of desired learning outcomes. And then line 14, establish and maintain positive communication with parents of assigned students, make provisions for being available to students and parents for education-related purposes outside of the instructional day. So basically, those 3 lines I see as important, and perhaps these things have been incorporated into some other role, but these seem to be important items that have been removed from the job description. Can someone speak to that?
The reason those are removed, that's the tutor description, and so those are still in the teacher description. So the tutor is not responsible for planning, developing, or having that parent contact on as much as a teacher. So that's the teacher's responsibility, and then what's needed for the tutor is coming from the teacher.
Okay,
So that's why those are removed specifically for, because they're not responsible for that development and planning.
gotcha. All right, thank you.
And then to cover that, there is a line in here that, where they will, any other assigned duties from the teachers at the very end, assume other duties as assigned.
Okay.
That kind of is where that's covered. The overall umbrella is whatever comes from that teacher that they need to do.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. Myers? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.